The emergency meeting of the Galactic High Council was called to order with a sharp bang of Ambassador Zixakari's crystalline appendage against the quantum resonance podium. The sound echoed through the massive chamber, bouncing off the perfectly engineered acoustic walls that had been designed to accommodate the hearing ranges of over 300 species. "Order, we will have order." The crystalline's facets flickered with waves of deep purple anxiety as they addressed the assembled representatives. Their crystalline structure, usually a pristine arrangement of geometric patterns, showed subtle signs of stress fractures, a clear indication of the gravity of the situation. The chamber, normally a model of decorum and civilized discourse, was in complete disarray. The methane-breathing Crollians were releasing agitated bursts of their atmosphere, causing the environmental containment fields to work overtime. The usually stoic Velutarians were vibrating their fur in distress patterns, creating visual interference with the holographic displays. Even the typically unflappable quantum collective was displaying erratic probability patterns. "Another Earthship has breached quarantine protocols," announced High Commander Inexthal of the Velutarians, their fur now standing completely on end. "This is the third incident this cycle, and we cannot continue to—" "Cannot continue to what exactly?" interrupted Council Elder Pzitz of the Hive Mind Consortium, their synchronized voice patterns creating a discordant harmony of frustration. "Cannot continue to pretend that our quarantine protocols are anything more than a desperate attempt to contain what we don't understand." The chamber erupted again, this time with various species trying to speak over each other in their native languages, causing the universal translators to lag and sputter. Ambassador Zixakari's crystalline form now showed visible cracks from the stress of maintaining order. "The humans must be informed of the real reason for the quarantine," stated Grand Architect Keelon of the Silicon Ascendancy, their metallic voice cutting through the chaos. "It is no longer ethical to—" "Ethical?" scoffed Void Navigator Hydra, their gaseous form swirling in agitation. "Was it ethical when the Jovian delegation had to be placed in isolation for 3 standard cycles after a mere 2-hour exposure to an Earthship? The entire delegation started exhibiting behaviors." The word behaviors sent a visible shudder through the assembly. Every species present had their own horror stories, their own incidents, their own reasons to fear what the humans unknowingly carried with them. "Let the record show," began Ambassador Zixakari, their voice stabilizing despite their deteriorating physical condition, "that the quarantine protocols were established for the protection of both our species and the humans themselves. The incident with trade vessel Stellar Horizon has only reinforced the necessity of these measures." The mention of the Stellar Horizon caused several representatives to emit their species equivalent of a groan. The vessel's story was already becoming legendary among the Council races, though not for reasons any of them were comfortable discussing in official capacity. "We must address the fundamental issue," declared Council Elder Pzitz. "The humans don't just carry it, they actively spread it without even realizing. Every ship, every delegation, every cultural exchange program. It's getting worse, not better." High Commander Inixthal's fur rippled in a pattern indicating agreement. "The quarantine protocols are our only defense against their humor," finished Grand Architect Quailon solemnly. "Their insidious, infectious, reality-altering sense of humor." The chamber fell into an uncomfortable silence. They all knew the truth. Humans were a species that had somehow evolved to find amusement in the absurd, to laugh at the unexpected, to make light of the serious. And worse, they were capable of spreading this cognitive disorder to other species through prolonged exposure. Ambassador Zixakari's form stabilized slightly as they prepared to make their final statement of the session. "The motion before the Council is clear. Do we maintain the quarantine protocols, or do we finally reveal to humanity the real reason their ships are always isolated?" The vote that would follow would determine not just the future of human-alien relations, but potentially the very nature of galactic civilization itself. After all, how does one explain to a species that their laughter is classified as a Class A memetic hazard? The emergency meeting of the Galactic High Council was called to order, with a sharp bang of Ambassador Zixakari's crystalline appendage against the quantum resonance podium. The sound echoed through the massive chamber, bouncing off the perfectly engineered acoustic walls that had been designed to accommodate the hearing ranges of over 300 species. Order, we will have order. The crystalline's facets flickered with waves of deep purple anxiety as they addressed the assembled representatives. Their crystalline structure, usually a pristine arrangement of geometric patterns, showed subtle signs of stress fractures, a clear indication of the gravity of the situation. The chamber, normally a model of decorum and civilized discourse, was in complete disarray. The methane-breathing Crollians were releasing agitated bursts of their atmosphere, causing the environmental containment fields to work overtime. The usually stoic Velutarians were vibrating their fur in distress patterns, creating visual interference with the holographic displays. Even the typically unflappable quantum collective was displaying erratic probability patterns. Another Earthship has breached quarantine protocols, announced High Commander Nixthal of the Velutarians, their fur now standing completely on end. This is the third incident this cycle, and we cannot continue to... Cannot continue to what exactly? Interrupted Council Elder Bzitz of the Hivemind Consortium, their synchronized voice patterns creating a discordant harmony of frustration. Cannot continue to pretend that our quarantine protocols are anything more than a desperate attempt to contain what we don't understand. The chamber erupted again, this time with various species trying to speak over each other in their native languages, causing the universal translators to lag and sputter. Ambassador Zixkari's crystalline form now showed visible cracks from the stress of maintaining order. The humans must be informed of the real reason for the quarantine, stated Grand Architect Quilon of the Silicon Ascendancy, their metallic voice cutting through the chaos. It is no longer ethical to... Ethical, scoffed Void Navigator Hydra, their gaseous form swirling in agitation. Was it ethical when the Jovian delegation had to be placed in isolation for 3 standard cycles after a mere 2-hour exposure to an Earthship? The entire delegation started exhibiting behaviors. The word behaviors sent a visible shudder through the assembly. Every species present had their own horror stories, their own incidents, their own reasons to fear what the humans unknowingly carried with them. As the council chamber descended into chaos once again, Ambassador Zixkari's mind drifted back to that fateful day, 57 cycles ago, when humanity made first contact with the galactic community. The memory crystals in the archive had preserved every detail of that historic moment. The human vessel, crude by galactic standards but somehow endearingly ambitious, had successfully navigated the quantum beacon network to reach the Council's first contact hub. The chosen representatives of Earth had emerged from their ship, adorned in their ceremonial white and blue spacesuits, as they called them. Everything had proceeded according to standard first contact protocols, right up until the moment when High Commander Nixthal's predecessor had tripped over their own ceremonial robe and tumbled down the greeting platform stairs. In that instant, something unprecedented happened. The humans made an unusual sound, a sort of rhythmic, explosive vocalization. At first, the assembled council members thought it was some kind of respiratory distress, but the humans' vital signs showed no indication of medical emergency. Instead, they appeared to be experiencing some form of collective psychological event that they later termed laughing. What happened next would forever change galactic society. Junior Ambassador Cleavon of the Methane Collective, who had been stationed closest to the humans, suddenly began emitting similar vocalizations. Within minutes, they had completely lost their composure, their normally precise molecular structure vibrating in unprecedented patterns. The archive footage showed the horror that spread through the assembly as Cleavon's condition proved contagious. Soon, other species began exhibiting similar symptoms. Crystallines chiming in discordant frequencies, Velutarians rippling their fur in chaotic patterns, even the quantum collective experiencing probability fluctuations that defied their basic nature. The emergency session that followed lasted 14 standard cycles. The finest xenobiologists, memetic specialists, and consciousness theorists in the galaxy were summoned to study this phenomenon. Their conclusion was both fascinating and terrifying. Humans had evolved a unique cognitive ability they called humor, a way of finding pleasure in the subversion of expected patterns and outcomes. More disturbing still, this trait proved to be transmissible through prolonged exposure. Species that had never before demonstrated such behavior began developing their own forms of humor, each filtered through their unique physiological and psychological frameworks. The Council's decision was swift and unanimous. All human vessels would be subject to strict quarantine protocols. Official explanation: standard biological contamination procedures. The truth: a desperate attempt to contain the spread of what would later be classified as cognitive paradigm shift syndrome, or, as some council members had taken to calling it in their private communications, the giggles. The discussion in the council chamber grew more heated as Grand Architect Quailon brought up the incident that had occurred just 3 solar cycles ago, the event that would forever be known as the quantum comedy catastrophe. It had started as a routine diplomatic meeting. The human delegation, led by Ambassador Chen, had been cleared for a carefully monitored conference with representatives from 12 major species. The topic: standardizing trade routes through the Orion Arm. Everything was proceeding according to protocol, with quantum-enforced isolation fields in place and all necessary memetic dampeners operating at full capacity. Ambassador Chen stood at the podium, delivering a thoroughly researched presentation on cargo manifest standardization. The Council's containment specialists monitored every word, expression, and gesture for signs of humor contamination. For 3 hours, everything remained perfectly boring, exactly as planned. Then it happened. Ambassador Chen reached the section about cargo classification codes. And so, they continued, completely unaware of the impending disaster. We propose a unified system where livestock is categorized under code L1V3, perishables under P3R1, and hazardous materials under, wait for it, boom. The human delegation snickered. Several council members would later swear in official testimony that they saw the memetic dampeners actually spark and fizzle in that moment. Get it? Chen added, grinning, because it might explode? The Quantum Collective representative was the first to break. Their usually perfectly synchronized probability fields suddenly fluctuated wildly, creating a cascade of alternative realities, where the joke was somehow even funnier. They began emitting unauthorized quantum possibilities, each one containing a different variation of the classification humor. "Containment breach," shouted Security Chief Vrix of the Silicon Ascendancy, their metallic form already showing signs of corrupted programming as their speech patterns began incorporating unexpected pauses for comedic timing. The Velutarian delegation's fur started rippling in what their xenobiologists would later classify as laugh waves. The sight of their normally immaculate fur moving in such chaotic patterns triggered something in the crystalline representatives whose usually harmonious resonance frequencies devolved into what could only be described as crystalline chortles. High Commander Nixithal attempted to restore order by initiating emergency protocols, but even they succumbed when Ambassador Chen, still oblivious to the chaos, continued with, "And don't even get me started on the code for anti-gravity units. It's UP2U. The HiveMind Consortium representatives, who normally operated in perfect synchronization, began experiencing what they later termed individualized amusement responses. Different segments of their collective consciousness started appreciating different aspects of the joke, leading to the first recorded case of a HiveMind experiencing multiple simultaneous punchlines. Void Navigator Hydra's gaseous form began swirling in entirely new patterns, forming shapes that somehow made the situation even more amusing to the already compromised assembly. Their attempts to maintain composure only resulted in what several witnesses described as visible gas puns. The emergency containment teams rushed in wearing their highest-grade memetic isolation suits, but it was too late. The damage was done. Ambassador Chen's presentation had somehow breached every known defense against human humor transmission. Worse still, the affected species had begun developing their own species-specific forms of wordplay. The crystallines started making puns about being under pressure. The Silicon Ascendancy representatives began incorporating binary humor into their communications. The Quantum Collective initiated what they claimed was a quantum comedy routine that existed in a superposition of being both funny and not funny until observed. Most alarming of all, the HiveMind Consortium had begun workshopping what they called collective comedy, jokes that could only be understood when perceived by multiple consciousness nodes simultaneously. Their first attempt, "Why did the singular consciousness cross the dimensional plane to reach the other minds?" caused a ripple of unauthorized amusement that threatened to breach the chamber's containment shields. Security footage from that day showed the human delegation standing in bewilderment as some of the most dignified beings in the galaxy succumbed to uncontrollable fits of their species equivalent of laughter. Ambassador Chen, still not fully grasping the situation, attempted to restore order by saying, "Tough crowd, huh? Don't worry, I've got more." That was when Emergency Protocol Omega had to be initiated. The entire diplomatic chamber was flooded with high-grade seriousness gas, a last resort countermeasure designed to suppress any form of humor. It took 3 hours for the affected representatives to regain their composure, and even then, several of them had to be placed in isolated meditation chambers for subsequent cycles to prevent humor relapses. The incident report, filed by the few unaffected observers, ran to over 1,000 pages. It detailed not only the immediate effects of the exposure, but also documented several previously unknown forms of humor that had spontaneously evolved during the event. The report had to be classified at the highest level, when researchers discovered that simply reading certain sections of it could trigger uncontrolled amusement responses. As the memory of that day faded from Ambassador Zixakari's consciousness, they noticed with alarm that their crystalline structure was showing signs of microscopic vibrations, the beginning stages of what their species now recognized as suppressed laughter. The Council would need to act fast if they hoped to prevent more incidents like these. The quarantine protocols were clearly no longer sufficient. The Council's chief scientist, Dr. Zivex, shuffled their tentacles nervously as they prepared to present their findings. The investigation into human humor had consumed the last 3 cycles of their research team's existence, and what they had discovered was more disturbing than anyone could have anticipated. Esteemed Council members, Dr. Zivex began, their chromatophores flickering anxiously. Our analysis of human humor has revealed something unprecedented in galactic history. They activated a holographic display showing complex neural patterns. Humans have evolved what we're calling a quantum cognitive resonance field, QCRF for short. The assembled council members leaned forward in their various environmental chambers, all thoughts of the recent catastrophe temporarily forgotten. This field, Dr. Zivex continued, operates on principles that defy our understanding of consciousness. When humans experience what they call humor, their QCRF generates ripples in the fabric of local reality. These ripples, their contagious, Grand Architect Quailon's metallic form vibrated with concern. Are you suggesting that human humor is actually a form of quantum manipulation? Worse, Dr. Zivex responded, their tentacles twisting into the shape universally recognized as extreme scientific distress. It's a form of quantum manipulation that operates on an emotional level. Our studies show that prolonged exposure to human humor actually alters the fundamental way other species perceive reality. The holographic display shifted to show comparative brain scans of various species before and after exposure to human jokes. The differences were startling. Species that had never shown any capacity for abstract humor had developed entire neural pathways dedicated to processing it. The quarantine protocols weren't just about containing laughter, Dr. Zivex revealed. They were about preventing the spread of a fundamental shift in consciousness. Humans don't just tell jokes, they're unconsciously rewriting the cognitive architecture of every species they encounter. High Commander Nixthal's fur bristled. But why? What evolutionary advantage could this possibly serve? Dr. Zivex activated another hologram, this one showing historical data from Earth. Our analysis suggests it's a survival mechanism. Humans evolved on a death world of such extreme volatility that they developed humor as a way to cope with existence itself. They learned to find amusement in the absurd, to laugh in the face of chaos, to make light of the darkest situations, and somewhere along the way, this ability became transferable. The implications are staggering, interjected Council Elder Bzutz, their synchronized voices showing signs of strain. If this continues to spread... Indeed, Dr. Zivex confirmed, we've already documented cases of various species developing their own unique forms of humor. The crystallines have begun appreciating what they call structural irony. The quantum collective has developed something they refer to as Schrödinger's punchline, a joke that only becomes funny when no one is observing it. The Doctor's tentacles formed increasingly complex geometric patterns as they reached the most troubling part of their findings. But the most concerning discovery is this. We've detected signs that this human QCRF is actually evolving. Each new generation of human humor is more potent, more infectious, and more reality-altering than the last. They displayed a final hologram showing the projected spread of human humor across the galaxy. The simulation showed waves of cognitive alteration spreading like ripples across space-time, transforming the very nature of galactic society. The quarantine protocols were never going to be a permanent solution, Dr. Zivex concluded. They were merely a stopgap measure while we tried to understand what we were dealing with. And now we know, humans aren't just carrying a contagious form of amusement. They're unconsciously engineering a galaxy-wide transformation in how sentient beings process reality itself. Ambassador Zixakari's crystalline form showed signs of both fear and fascination. Are you saying that human humor is essentially a form of cognitive terraforming? Precisely, Dr. Zivex confirmed, their chromatophores now displaying the complete spectrum of scientific awe. Every joke, every pun, every moment of shared laughter is literally reshaping the consciousness of every species they encounter, and the most remarkable part, they have no idea they're doing it. The chamber fell into stunned silence as the implications sank in. The quarantine protocols hadn't just been about preventing the spread of laughter, they had been a desperate attempt to slow down the most significant transformation in galactic history. As if to prove the point, a junior member of the Hive Mind Consortium suddenly transmitted, "Why did the quantum physicists cross the supersymmetric membrane? Because they were stringing along." The resulting wave of unauthorized amusement required 3 doses of emergency seriousness gas to contain. The Council's worst fears were rapidly becoming reality. Reports flooded in from across the galaxy, each more alarming than the last. The quantum cognitive resonance field was spreading faster than anyone had anticipated. "We have confirmed cases in the Crab Nebula," reported Security Chief Vrex, their metallic voice containing unauthorized traces of mirth. "A colony of plasma beings has developed what they're calling state change comedy. They're transforming from solid to gas states purely for entertainment value." Ambassador Zixakari's crystalline form trembled as they processed the incoming data. The latest reports showed that an entire sector of crystalline beings had begun organizing what they called resonance comedy clubs, where they would deliberately vibrate at frequencies that created elaborate sound-based jokes. The Methane Collective in Sector 7 has started performing something they call interpretative humor, announced Void Navigator Hydra, their gaseous form barely maintaining cohesion. They're using their atmospheric manipulations to create complex chemical compounds that form molecular puns. The situation in the Silicon Ascendancy was equally concerning. Their binary-based consciousness had evolved to appreciate programming humor, leading to a galaxy-wide epidemic of what they termed runtime errors of hilarity. Entire networks had to be quarantined after being infected with what appeared to be deliberately coded jokes. Most troubling of all was the case of the Hive Mind Consortium's newest colony. The typically synchronous collective had developed distinct humor personalities, with different nodes of the hive mind specializing in different forms of comedy. Some focused on observational humor about the nature of collective consciousness, while others had mastered the art of multi-dimensional wordplay. "Our containment measures are failing," admitted High Commander Inixthal, their fur now permanently arranged in what xenobiologists were calling a jovial pattern. The latest statistics show that 73% of all known spacefaring species have developed some form of humor response. We're looking at an exponential growth rate of joke creation across all sectors. The data stream showed the spread of humor types across the galaxy, quantum comedy clusters in the Orion Arm, metaphysical stand-up routines in the Sagittarius Dwarf, and an entirely new form of astronomy-based humor emerging from the galactic core. Even the most serious species were showing signs of contamination. A particularly concerning report came from the edges of known space, where a previously undiscovered species had made first contact by transmitting what appeared to be a carefully constructed joke about cosmic expansion. The species had apparently developed humor independently, suggesting that the human QCRF had somehow transcended normal space-time boundaries. "We must face the possibility," concluded Dr. Zivex, their tentacles now permanently twisted into the shape of scientific bemusement, "that we are witnessing the early stages of a galaxy-wide cognitive revolution. The human capacity for humor isn't just spreading, it's evolving and adapting to each species it encounters. The council chamber, once a bastion of serious deliberation, now regularly echoed with unauthorized outbursts of species-specific amusement. Even the emergency seriousness gas was showing decreasing effectiveness as various species developed immunities through what researchers termed humor adaptation. The galaxy was changing one laugh at a time, and there seemed to be no way to stop it. The emergency session of the council stretched into its 14th hour. The chamber's environmental systems struggled to maintain stability as dozens of species argued, debated, and occasionally broke into unauthorized displays of humor. "We must consider more extreme measures," declared High Commander Nixthal, their fur now arranged in complex patterns that somehow conveyed both serious intent and subtle comedic timing. "I propose we establish a galaxy-wide network of humor suppression fields." The Silicon Ascendancy's representatives buzzed with disagreement. "We've already attempted local suppression fields," Grand Architect Kelon countered. "Our latest models showed a 99.9% failure rate. The fields themselves became infected with what our analysts are calling ironic humor. They started generating their own jokes about suppression." Ambassador Zix-Sakari's crystalline form resonated with frustration. "Perhaps we should consider the Quantum Collective's proposal." All eyes, optical sensors, and sensory apparatuses turned to the Quantum Collective's representative, who existed in a state of both complete seriousness and barely suppressed amusement. "Our solution is simple," they transmitted. "We create a quantum uncertainty field around all human vessels. If no one can observe them, perhaps the humor won't collapse into a definite state." "That was attempted in the Carina sector," Dr. Zivex interjected, their tentacles forming the shape of scientific exasperation. The uncertainty field developed what we can only describe as quantum comedy awareness. It began generating probability waves of increasingly complex jokes. The Hive Mind Consortium shared their collective experience. "We attempted to isolate our consciousness nodes that showed signs of humor infection," Council Elder Bzitzi reported. "The isolated nodes developed a new form of comedy based entirely on the concept of isolation itself. The joke spread faster than our quarantine protocols." Reports from across the galaxy continued to stream in. The crystalline colonies in the outer rim had attempted to dampen their resonance frequencies to prevent the spread of structural humor, only to discover that the dampening itself had become a source of what they termed metacomedy. The Methane Collective's representatives released a burst of frustrated gases. "Our attempts to filter out humor-infected atmospheric compounds resulted in the creation of an entirely new class of gaseous wordplay. We're now dealing with clouds that form themselves into visual puns." Void Navigator Hydra's form swirled in patterns of defeat. "Even the void itself appears to be compromised. We've detected pockets of space where the very vacuum seems to be amused." The Council's Security Division presented their latest findings. Every countermeasure they had attempted had not only failed, but had somehow made the situation worse. The seriousness gas was now being metabolized by certain species into a form of anti-humor that was, paradoxically, even funnier than regular humor. "What about the temporal isolation proposal?" suggested a junior member of the Silicon Ascendancy. "If we could place human ships in time stasis." "Absolutely not." Dr. Zivex's tentacles formed the universal symbol for temporal disaster. "Our simulations suggest that temporal isolation would only result in compressed humor density. When released, the accumulated jokes would create a humor singularity, a point of infinite comedic density from which no seriousness could escape." The debate raged on. The crystallines proposed a galaxy-wide resonance dampening field, only to be reminded that the last test of such a system had resulted in the creation of what was now known as harmonically synchronized comedy. The Quantum Collective suggested shifting all human ships into parallel universes where humor didn't exist, but preliminary experiments had shown that the human QCRF could bridge dimensional barriers, leading to what researchers termed multi-dimensional comedic contamination. Even the Hive Mind Consortium's attempt to develop a collective consciousness immune to humor had backfired spectacularly, resulting in the first recorded case of a hive mind developing multiple comedy personalities. As the session stretched into its 15th hour, Ambassador Zixakari's crystalline form showed signs of complete structural fatigue. "We must face the reality," they chimed wearily. "Every attempt to contain this phenomenon has not only failed but has contributed to its evolution. The human capacity for humor appears to be not just resistant to our containment efforts, but actually strengthened by them." The chamber fell into a silence broken only by the occasional suppressed chuckle from species that had already succumbed to the infection. The galaxy's greatest minds had to admit defeat. They were witnessing an unstoppable force of cognitive evolution, and there was nothing they could do about it. As the council chamber descended into exhausted silence, Dr. Zivex's chromatophores suddenly lit up with the unmistakable pattern of scientific epiphany. Their tentacles twisted into a shape that somehow conveyed both extreme revelation and cosmic irony. "Esteemed council members," they announced, their voice trembling with the weight of understanding, "we've been approaching this entirely wrong. The final analysis of our research has revealed something extraordinary." The assembled representatives leaned forward in their various containment fields, all traces of humor temporarily suspended by genuine curiosity. "Humans didn't evolve humor as a coping mechanism," Dr. Zivex continued, their tentacles forming increasingly complex patterns. "They evolved it as a form of cognitive advancement. What we're witnessing isn't a contamination, it's an upgrade." The holographic displays activated, showing a new set of data that caused several junior council members to emit unauthorized gasps. The charts revealed that species exposed to human humor showed increased problem-solving capabilities, enhanced creative thinking, and most surprisingly, improved diplomatic relations with other affected species. "The human quantum cognitive resonance field isn't a weapon or a virus," Dr. Zivex explained. "It's a gift. Their ability to find amusement in the absurd, to laugh in the face of chaos, to share joy through humor, it's actually an advanced form of consciousness that we never evolved on our own." Ambassador Zixakari's crystalline form vibrated with understanding. "Are you suggesting that humans are unconsciously uplifting the entire galaxy?" "Precisely," confirmed Dr. Zivex. "Every joke, every laugh, every moment of shared humor is actually helping our species evolve beyond our original limitations. The humans aren't contaminating us. They're teaching us how to transcend our own cognitive boundaries." The council chamber erupted in a mixture of awe, amusement, and acceptance. The quantum collective's representatives began generating probability waves of pure joy. The hive mind consortium's various nodes synchronized into a harmony of understanding. Even the Silicon Ascendancy's usually rigid logical processes expanded to accommodate this new paradigm. High Commander Enixathal's fur arranged itself into a pattern of official declaration. "Then our course is clear. We must end the quarantine protocols, not because they've failed, but because they were never needed in the first place." "I propose a new protocol," suggested Grand Architect Quilon, their metallic voice containing traces of what could only be described as excitement. "Instead of isolation, we institute a program of controlled exposure. Let us embrace this gift of human humor and learn to wield it properly." The vote was unanimous, a first in council history. The new cognitive enhancement through humor protocol was established immediately. Human ships would no longer be quarantined, but would instead be welcomed as carriers of what was now recognized as the next stage in galactic evolution. As the council session finally drew to a close, Ambassador Zixakari made one final observation. "Perhaps this was the greatest joke of all, that we spent so many cycles trying to contain something that was meant to set us free." The chamber filled with various species versions of laughter, each unique yet somehow harmonious. The crystallines chimed in crystalline mirth, the quantum collective generated amused probability waves, and the hive mind consortium created a symphony of synchronized chuckles. As if to put a final punctuation mark on the historic moment, a junior member of the Silicon Ascendancy transmitted what would become the first officially sanctioned joke in council history. "Why did the human cross the galaxy? To teach the rest of us how to get to the other side." The resulting wave of multi-species amusement was so powerful, it was detected 3 sectors away, and for the first time in galactic history, no one tried to contain it.